The old man had been sitting at gate C-22 for 4 hours when the woman in the cream-colored blazer called security on him. He was 81 years old. He was wearing a faded olive green field jacket that was older than most of the people in the terminal. His pants were clean but worn at the knees. His shoes, black leather, brushed but cracked across the toe, sat flat on the floor. A small brown duffel bag was tucked between his feet. His hands, age-spotted and thick-knuckled, rested on his lap. He had been quiet. He had not spoken to anyone. He had not moved from his seat in the corner row by the window since 6:47 a.m. What he had done was something the woman in the cream blazer found unforgivable. He had cried, not loudly, not visibly to anyone walking past. But she had been seated 3 rows over for the last 40 minutes, and she had seen his shoulders shake twice, and she had seen him wipe his eyes with the back of his hand, and she had decided, with the kind of decisive certainty that women like her cultivate over decades, that he was making her uncomfortable. So she stood up. She walked her cream-colored Burberry blazer and her $700 leather tote and her freshly highlighted hair across the gate area. She approached the gate agent. She pointed back at the old man. She used the word vagrant. She used the words obviously homeless. She used the words I don't feel safe. The gate agent, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Destiny, looked at the old man. Then she looked at the woman in the blazer. Then she radioed airport security. 400 travelers were sitting in or moving through the gate area at that moment. 400 adults. 400 witnesses. Not one of them stood up, except a 9-year-old boy in a Phillies hoodie who was sitting 2 seats down from the old man, eating a bag of pretzels. His name was Marcus. He was traveling alone for the first time in his life, an unaccompanied minor flight to visit his father in Atlanta. He had a plastic lanyard around his neck with his flight information. He had a little blue backpack at his feet. He had been watching the whole thing. And when the security officers walked up to the old man and asked him to come with them, Marcus did something that 400 adults had failed to do. He stood up. He walked over to the security officers. He looked up at them with the calm, level eyes of a child who had been raised by a single mother who had taught him 3 things. Say please, say thank you, and never let anyone be invisible. And he said one sentence, 11 words. 11 words that made the security officers stop walking, made the gate agent reach for her phone, made the woman in the cream blazer's face go white, and made every traveler in gate C-22 turn their heads at the same time. 11 words that, by the end of that morning, would be replayed by news anchors in 3 cities, repeated by talk show hosts on 2 networks, and written on the chalkboard of a 4th-grade classroom in West Philadelphia, where Marcus's teacher would tell her students, this is what courage sounds like. But before you understand what Marcus said, before you understand who the old man really was, why he was crying, and what was inside that small brown duffel bag, you need to understand what kind of morning this was. What kind of woman walked across a terminal to call security on a stranger, and what kind of child was raised to know that some moments cannot be unwitnessed. If you're already feeling something, if your chest is tight or your jaw is clenched, stay with me. Because what happened at gate C-22 that Tuesday morning is going to remind you of something you may have forgotten. And before this video ends, you're going to know exactly what 11 words a 9-year-old boy used to stop an entire airport from making the worst mistake of its day. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe right now and tap that notification bell, because this one is going to take you somewhere unforgettable. The old man's name was Walter Greaves. He was born in 1944 in Macon, Georgia, the 7th of 9 children. His father had picked cotton. His mother had cleaned houses. He had grown up in a wooden house with a tin roof and a porch that creaked under any weight greater than 70 pounds. He had walked 4 miles each way to a 1-room schoolhouse that the state of Georgia had built for black children in 1948 and had never once renovated. He had eaten cornbread and collards and whatever rabbit his Uncle Lonnie could trap behind the property line. When he turned 18, in 1962, he had done what hundreds of thousands of young black men in the Jim Crow South did when they wanted to leave Macon and didn't have the money for a Greyhound ticket north. He had enlisted. He had served in the United States Army for 26 years. He had done 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He had been awarded the Bronze Star with Valor. He had been awarded the Silver Star. He had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest combat decoration in the U.S. Army, given for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. He had received it on November 14, 1969, after personally carrying 4 wounded men out of an ambush at Hill 875 in Kontum Province. 4 men, 1 trip each. The last man, a private from Tennessee named Earl Henderson, had been bleeding from a wound in his thigh and had not stopped screaming the entire 200-meter crawl back through a rice paddy under fire. Walter had pressed his hand against Earl's leg the whole way back, cursing softly in Earl's ear to keep him conscious. Earl Henderson had lived. He had died of natural causes in 2014, at his homes in Knoxville, surrounded by his wife and 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The 7th grandchild had been named Walter. Walter Greaves had retired from the Army in 1988 as a sergeant major. He had moved back to the East Coast. He had married a woman named Margaret, who taught 3rd grade in Camden, New Jersey. They had not been able to have children. They had filled the small house they bought in West Philadelphia with foster kids. 12 in total, over the next 31 years. 3 of those kids had stayed long-term. 2 had ended up calling Walter and Margaret Daddy and Mama. All 12 of them had been at the funeral. Margaret had died on October 12th of the previous year. Lung cancer. She had never smoked a day in her life. Walter had spent the last 14 months trying to learn how to live in a house that had stopped being a home. The reason he was at Philadelphia International Airport at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March was simple. He was flying to San Antonio, Texas, for the funeral of his last surviving brother, Curtis Greaves. Curtis was 83. Curtis had died in his sleep 4 nights earlier. Curtis had been the only person left in the world who had known Walter when Walter was a small boy in a wooden house with a tin roof in Macon, Georgia. Walter had bought his ticket online with the help of one of his old foster sons, a man named Jamal who lived 2 blocks from him and came over every Sunday to make sure Walter ate a real meal. Jamal had wanted to come to the airport with him. Walter had said no. Walter had taken the regional rail to the airport at 4:00 a.m. Walter had checked himself in. Walter had passed through security. Walter had found gate C22 and sat down in the corner row by the window, because the window seat felt the closest thing to alone that the airport offered, and he had cried. He had cried for Curtis. He had cried for Margaret. He had cried for Earl Henderson, whom he had not thought about in months, but who had appeared in his memory that morning, the way that sometimes do, unannounced, with no warning. He had cried for the wooden house in Macon. He had cried for himself, an 81-year-old man who had buried more people in the last 14 months than he had buried in the previous 80 years combined. He had cried quietly. He had cried without making a sound. He had wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the way he had wiped them at Margaret's grave, and at Curtis's voicemail, and at the news that the old church in Macon had finally been torn down, and the woman in the cream-colored blazer had decided he was a problem. Her name was Vanessa Carmichael. She was 46 years old. She was a senior vice president of marketing for a luxury goods conglomerate based in New York. She was flying from Philadelphia to Miami for a long weekend at a friend's beach house. Her husband was meeting her there on Friday. She had paid for the upgrade to first class with miles. She had a Bloody Mary planned for the moment the seatbelt sign turned off. She did not see Walter Greaves when she looked at him. She did not see 81 years of one human life. She did not see a Bronze Star or a Silver Star or a Distinguished Service Cross. She did not see Margaret or Curtis or Earl Henderson or 12 foster kids or a tin roof in Macon. She saw an old black man in a faded military jacket sitting alone at her gate area, and she saw him crying, and she felt something in her chest that she had been trained by what she would have called her good judgment, and what other people would have called something else, to interpret as discomfort. So she stood up. She crossed the terminal. She spoke to the gate agent. She said the words vagrant and obviously homeless and I don't feel safe. And the gate agent radioed security. The 2 security officers who arrived at gate C22 were both men. One was named Officer Patrick Doyle, a 42-year-old white man with a buzz cut and a gut that hung slightly over his belt. The other was named Officer Marcus Williams, a 38-year-old black man with a calm face and the eyes of someone who had been doing this job for 15 years and had learned, painfully, how often the calls he responded to were not about what they pretended to be about. They walked up to Walter. Doyle did the talking. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Walter looked up. His eyes were red. He had, in fact, just stopped crying about 2 minutes earlier. He had wiped his face. He had taken a sip of water from a small bottle he had bought at a kiosk inside security. He had been in the process of unzipping his duffel bag to take out a piece of folded paper. He did not finish unzipping the bag. "I'm sorry. We've had a complaint. We need to ask you to come with us so we can sort this out." "What kind of complaint?" "Sir, we just need you to come with us." Walter did not move immediately. He looked from Doyle to Williams. Williams did not meet his eyes. Williams looked at the floor. Williams was a black man in a security uniform on a public payroll who knew exactly what was happening at Gate C-22 and who had not yet figured out how to stop it. Walter took a breath. He said, "Officer, I have a flight at 8:15 to San Antonio. My brother died. I'm going to his funeral. Sir, we just need you to come with us. I have a ticket. I have an ID. I have a boarding pass." "Sir." The voice was getting harder. Doyle had been doing this job for 8 years. He was tired. He had been called to gate areas like this hundreds of times. He had stopped distinguishing between the calls. Walter started to stand. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the armrests. 81-year-old hands do not stand up on command. 81-year-old knees do not respond to the urgency of strangers. He was halfway out of the seat when he had to sit back down, just for a moment, to catch his breath. And in that exact moment, that pause, that sit back down, that visible age, every single person sitting in Gate C-22 had a decision to make. There were 412 travelers in the gate area at 7:24 a.m. that Tuesday morning, according to the gate's seat allocation records. Some were flying to Miami, some to Tampa, some to Atlanta, some to San Antonio on the same flight as Walter. Some had been waiting for boarding announcements for 40 minutes, scrolling on their phones, drinking coffee, listening to music, eating breakfast wraps from the Au Bon Pain across the way. All 412 had a clear view of Walter. All 412 had heard the woman in the cream blazer raise her voice. All 412 had watched the security officers walk up to him. 399 of them looked away. Some looked at their phones harder. Some pretended to read an emergency information card. Some put on noise-canceling headphones. Some opened their laptops and started typing as if a memo had just become urgent. One man, a businessman in his 50s, wearing a gray suit and Italian shoes, actually got up and walked down the terminal toward the next gate away from the situation, as if the simple physical act of being elsewhere would absolve him. 12 people watched openly. None of them spoke. That left one. Marcus Henderson. He was 9 years old. He was sitting 2 seats down from Walter in the corner row by the window. He was wearing a Philadelphia Phillies hoodie that was too big for him because his mother had bought it on the assumption that he would grow into it. He was wearing blue jeans and white sneakers. He had a plastic lanyard around his neck with his flight information and a yellow tag that said unaccompanied minor. He had a little blue backpack at his feet. He was eating a bag of pretzels from a small plastic snack pack his mother had given him before kissing him at the curb at 5:30 that morning. His mother's name was Tasha Henderson. She was a registered nurse at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She was 34 years old. She had raised Marcus by herself since the day his father moved to Atlanta to take a job and never came back when Marcus was 3. The reason Marcus was flying alone to Atlanta that day was that his father, who had since started a new family with a woman named Brittany, had agreed to spend a week with Marcus over spring break. Tasha had spent a month preparing Marcus for the flight. They had practiced what to do if something went wrong. They had practiced what to do if a stranger spoke to him. They had practiced what to do if the flight attendant asked him questions. They had role-played, at the kitchen table, every possible scenario. Tasha had not role-played the scenario of Marcus watching an old man being walked away by security. She had not needed to, because she had taught Marcus since he was old enough to understand language 3 things. Say please, say thank you, and never let anyone be invisible. Marcus heard his mother's voice in his head as he watched Walter struggle to stand up. He heard her voice as Officer Doyle said, "Sir," for the 3rd time, his tone harder each time. He heard her voice as Walter sat back down to catch his breath. He heard her voice as Walter looked, for the briefest moment, at the 412 people around him, and saw exactly how many of them were looking back. 399 had looked away. 1 9-year-old boy had not. Marcus put down his pretzel bag. He stood up. He walked over to the security officers. He looked up at Doyle and Williams, and he said the 11 words his mother had never specifically taught him, but that came out of his mouth as if he had been preparing for them his entire short life. "That's my grandfather. He's not bothering anyone. He's just sad." The gate area went silent. Officer Doyle looked at Marcus. Then he looked at Walter. Walter was staring at Marcus with an expression that Doyle would later, when he was off duty and at home with his wife, describe as the face of a man who has just heard the voice of God and was not expecting it. Walter did not know this child. He had never seen this child before. The child was not his grandson. But Walter did not say anything. He looked at Marcus. And Marcus, who did not know what he was doing, who had no plan, who had simply stood up because his mother had told him that some moments cannot be unwitnessed. Marcus looked back at Walter, and Marcus made a choice. He walked the 4 steps across the gray industrial carpet of Gate C-22, past Officer Doyle, past Officer Williams, past the row of empty seats. He stopped in front of Walter. He looked up at the old man's face. Then he sat down in the seat next to him. He took Walter's hand. He held it. He looked back up at the security officers. He said, "We're together." Now, if you're watching this and your chest is doing something, hold on. Because what's about to happen at Gate C-22 in the next 90 seconds is one of the most extraordinary moments that has ever happened in a Philadelphia airport. And it doesn't happen because of a billionaire. It doesn't happen because of a limousine pulling up outside. It happens because 399 adults watched a 9-year-old child do what they couldn't. And one of those adults, just one, finally remembered who they were. Stay with me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that bell now. Because this story is about to remind you why courage is contagious, and why every airport, every gate, every grocery store, every sidewalk in America has a child watching to see who you choose to be. The first adult to move was a woman named Linda Park. She was 53 years old. She was a high school chemistry teacher from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. She was flying to Tampa to visit her daughter, who had just had a baby. She had been sitting 2 rows behind Marcus, watching the entire scene with her hand frozen halfway to her coffee cup. When Marcus took Walter's hand and said, "We're together," Linda Park stood up. She did not know what she was going to do. She walked across the gate area. She stopped beside Marcus and Walter. She looked at the security officers. She said, "I saw the whole thing. The man was sitting quietly. He hasn't done anything. The complaint was made by that woman over there, and I'd like to know what specifically she's accusing him of." The woman in the cream blazer, Vanessa Carmichael, was still standing about 10 feet away. She had been watching the security officers do what she had asked them to do. She had been adjusting her purse. She had been planning quietly to write a 5-star review for Officer Doyle's performance later. When Linda Park spoke, Vanessa Carmichael's face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, indignation, calculation. She started to speak. She said, "Excuse me, this isn't your..." The next adult to stand up was a man named Reginald Brooks. He was 68 years old. He was a retired Philadelphia bus driver. He was flying to Atlanta for the same reason Marcus was, to visit family. He had been sitting 4 rows behind Walter and had been watching the entire scene with the patience of a man who had spent 41 years driving buses in West Philadelphia and had seen this exact dynamic play out dozens of times before. He stood up. He walked over. He stood next to Linda Park. He said, "Yes, I saw it too. Old man's been sitting quietly the whole time. Hasn't said a word to nobody. Mind explaining the problem?" Vanessa Carmichael's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The third adult to stand up was a young woman in her late 20s named Priya Shah. She was a software engineer from Center City. She was flying to Tampa for a wedding. She had been on her phone when the situation started, but had looked up when Marcus walked over to the security officers. She stood up. She walked over. She stood next to Reginald Brooks. She said simply, "I saw it too." Then a 4th person stood up, a construction worker in his 40s named Hector Ramirez, with a hard hat hanging off his backpack. He was flying to Miami for a job. He walked over without saying anything. He just stood there. Then a 5th person, a nurse named Wendy Chen, going to visit her mother in Atlanta. She walked over, then a 6th, then a 7th, then 12, then 20, then 40. By the time the gate area finished moving, by the time the rustling and shuffling and standing of bodies finally stopped, there were 63 travelers standing in a loose semicircle around Walter Greaves and Marcus Henderson. 63 adults who had just seen a 9-year-old boy do something they had not done. The remaining 349 travelers in Gate C-22 had not moved. Some of them, the man in the gray suit, the woman who had been hiding in behind her laptop, the businessmen in the back row, were still pretending to be elsewhere. But 63 had stood up. Officer Doyle looked at the 63. He looked at Officer Williams. Officer Williams was looking at him with an expression that Doyle had never seen Williams wear in their 3 years of working together. An expression that said, "You are not going to do this. You are going to figure out how to walk this back right now, or this is going to become something neither of us will recover from." Doyle cleared his throat. He turned to Vanessa Carmichael. "Ma'am, what specifically is the complaint?" Vanessa Carmichael opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. He's clearly homeless. He was making me." Reginald Brooks's voice cut across the gate area, calm, steady, not loud but carrying. "Ma'am, this is an airport. He's got a boarding pass. He's got luggage. Last I checked, you don't get into an airport gate unless you've cleared TSA, so he's not homeless. He's a passenger. Same as you. Same as me. Same as that little boy." Vanessa Carmichael's hand went to her purse strap. She squeezed it. He was crying. The silence that followed was 30 seconds long. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when a person speaks a sentence in public, that, the moment it leaves their mouth, they hear themselves say it and realize what it actually sounded like. Linda Park, the chemistry teacher, was the first to break the silence. "He was crying," she repeated, slowly, not as a question, as a sentence being held up to the light. "He was crying, and so you called security." Vanessa Carmichael did not answer. Linda Park looked at Walter. Then she looked back at Vanessa. "Ma'am, do you know why he might have been crying?" Did you ask him?" "That's not my. Did anyone ask him?" The silence came back, this time longer. This time, into that silence came a small voice, Marcus's voice. He was still sitting Walter, holding Walter's hand. He had been quiet through the whole exchange. But now he looked up at Vanessa Carmichael, this woman in her cream blazer and her $700 and her fresh highlights. And he said, quietly, "His brother died. He told me. He's going to the funeral." Walter Greaves had not, in fact, told Marcus anything. They had not exchanged a word until Marcus had walked over and said the line about my grandfather. But Walter had unzipped his duffel bag a few inches when the security officers approached, and Marcus, sitting next to him, could now see what was on top of the contents inside. It was a folded program, the kind of program a funeral home prints, the kind that has a photograph on the front and a name and a date. Marcus could read. Marcus had been reading since he was 4. Marcus could see the name Curtis Greaves and the dates 1942 to 2026, and the photograph of an old black man in a Sunday suit, smiling at a camera in what looked like a backyard barbecue. Marcus had said the truth. He had just said it without being told. Vanessa Carmichael's face did something then. Something that the people standing in the semicircle would later describe in different ways. Some would say she looked like she had been slapped. Some would say she looked like she was going to be sick. Some would say she looked like she finally saw herself. Whatever it was, it lasted about 4 seconds. And during those 4 seconds, Vanessa Carmichael was standing in the middle of an airport at 7:31 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, in front of 63 adult witnesses and 349 non-witnesses and 2 security officers and 1 9-year-old boy and an 81-year-old man with a Distinguished Service Cross from Vietnam. And she was being shown, clearly, without anyone shouting or pointing, exactly what she had done. She had called security on a grieving old man. Because his grief made her uncomfortable. She did not apologize. People like Vanessa Carmichael often cannot, in moments like that, find the words. The apology that should have come. The simple, true, hard apology that a child could have offered without effort. Caught somewhere in her throat, behind a wall of professional armor and learned dismissal that had been built up over 46 years. Instead, she turned. She walked stiffly back toward her seat. She picked up her tote. She did not look at Walter. She did not look at Marcus. She walked away from gate C-22 and toward the women's restroom about 30 yards down the terminal. She would later miss the boarding call for her flight to Miami. She would later sit in that restroom stall for 19 minutes. She would later, in the months that followed, find that the moment at gate C-22 had not left her body, that it sat in her chest, the way certain memories sit, unprocessed, unhealed, demanding something of her she had not yet figured out how to give. But that was later. Right now, at gate C-22, Officer Doyle exhaled a breath he had not known he was holding. He looked at Walter. He said, "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll let you get back to your morning." Walter did not say anything. Officer Williams, the black officer who had not spoken, stepped past Doyle. He went down on one knee in front of Walter. He looked at the duffel bag, at the folded funeral program visible inside. He saw the dates. He looked back up at Walter. He said quietly, "Sir, I'm so sorry for your loss." Walter's eyes filled. William said, "And Sergeant Major." He had glanced very briefly at the small lapel pin on Walter's olive green field jacket. The one Walter had pinned on that morning out of habit, the one most travelers would never have noticed. "Thank you for your service." Walter blinked. He inhaled slowly. He nodded, just once. He said, "Thank you, son." The semicircle of 63 travelers did not disperse immediately. They stood for another minute. Some of them came forward, one or two at a time, and shook Walter's hand. A woman pressed a tissue into his palm. The construction worker, Hector Ramirez, said, "Sir, I'm sorry for what just happened to you." Reginald Brooks, the retired bus driver, said, "Sergeant Major, can I sit with you a while?" "I'd like that." Walter nodded. Reginald sat down 2 seats over. Linda Park, the chemistry teacher, sat down next to Marcus. She said, "Honey, what's your name?" "Marcus." "How old are you, Marcus?" 9. "Are your parents here?" "My mom's at home. I'm flying to my dad in Atlanta. By myself." "Oh," Linda blinked. "Marcus, what you just did your mama teach you to do that?" Marcus thought about it. He looked at Walter, who was now talking quietly with Reginald Brooks about Macon, Georgia. Marcus said, "She taught me not to let anyone be invisible." Linda Park reached into her purse. She pulled out a small business card. She said, "Marcus, I'd like your mama's number, if that's okay. I want to call her and tell her what you did." She also pulled out a tissue. She wiped her own face with it. The boarding call came at 7:47 a.m., Walter's flight to San Antonio. The gate agent, Destiny, made the announcement over the intercom, but she also walked over to Walter's seat personally and said, "Sirs, I'd like to walk you down myself, if that's all right. We'll get you settled in your seat. The pilot has been informed." Walter nodded. He stood up, slowly the way 81-year-old men stand up. He picked up his small brown duffel bag. He looked at Marcus. He said, "Son, come here." Marcus stood up. Walter put both hands on Marcus's shoulders. He looked at him for a long moment. Marcus looked back. The old man's eyes were wet again, but a different kind of wet. The kind of wet that comes when a man who has carried wounded soldiers across rice paddies in Vietnam suddenly understands that the world, this world, his world, has just sent him a child to remind him that the rope has not been cut, that the line goes on, that the fire he has spent his life carrying has been received. Walter said, "What's your name, son?" "Marcus, sir." "Marcus what?" "Marcus Henderson." Walter's hands did not move from Marcus's shoulders, but something in his face moved. A small flicker. A surprise. "Marcus Henderson?" "Yes, sir." "Where are your people from, Marcus?" "My mom's from here, Philadelphia. My dad's in Atlanta." "Why?" "Marcus, do you know who your great-grandfather was?" "On your daddy's side." Marcus thought about it. "I never met him. Mom says he died before I was born." "What was his name, Marcus? Do you know?" "Earl, I think." "Earl something." Walter Greaves's hands tightened on Marcus's shoulders for half a second. Then they relaxed. His face did something extraordinary. The face of an 81-year-old veteran who had, in the last hour, watched a stranger try to have him removed from a public space, watched a child intervene, watched 63 strangers stand up because of that child, and was now realizing, slowly, like a sunrise, what the child's last name meant. "Earl Henderson?" "Yeah, I think." "From Tennessee?" Walter Greaves closed his eyes. He kept his hands on Marcus's shoulders. He said very quietly, "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you, and I want you to remember it for the rest of your life. Can you remember it for me?" "Yes, sir." On November 14th, 1969, 56 years ago, there was a man in Vietnam named Earl Henderson, from Knoxville, Tennessee, private in the United States Army, 21 years old. He got shot in the leg during an ambush at a place called Hill 875. I crawled out and got him. I carried him on my back through a rice paddy, back to a medevac. He lived. He went home. He got married. He had a son. That son grew up and had a son. That son grew up and had a son. And that son," Walter opened his eyes, "is named Marcus." Marcus looked at him. Marcus did not understand fully what he was being told. Not all of it. He was 9. But he understood enough. "You knew my great-grandpa?" "I knew him for about 40 minutes, son." "Long enough." Marcus's eyes went very wide. He said, "Are you the man who carried him?" Walter Greaves nodded, once. The nod of a soldier. Marcus did something then that no one in the semicircle expected. He didn't cry. He didn't gasp. He didn't say anything. He stepped forward, and he wrapped both of his 9-year-old arms around Walter Greaves's waist, and he buried his face in the faded olive green of the field jacket that had been issued to Walter in 1968, and that Walter had worn that morning to bury his last brother. Walter Greaves put one hand on the back of the boy's head. He held him there. and in a Philadelphia airport at 7:53 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. Surrounded by 63 adults who would never forget what they were watching, an 81-year-old veteran and a 9-year-old boy stood at gate C-22 with their arms around each other, completing a circle that had begun in a rice paddy in Kontum Province 56 years earlier and had been waiting, patiently, for a Tuesday morning when one cream-colored blazer would call security on the wrong man at the wrong gate and one 9-year-old boy in a Phillies hoodie would stand up. Linda Park was crying openly now. So was Reginald Brooks. So was Officer Williams, who had pulled out a handkerchief and was pretending to wipe his nose. Officer Doyle was simply standing there, his jaw slack, processing the most consequential 5 minutes of his 8-year career. The flight to San Antonio boarded in 7 minutes. Walter walked down the jet bridge with Destiny on one side and his small brown duffel bag in his other hand. Before he disappeared into the plane, he turned. He looked back at gate C-22. He saw Marcus standing in the front of the gate area, watching him. He saw the 63 travelers, some of them still standing, some of them sitting back down, all of them turned toward him. He raised his hand. He gives a small, slow, measured wave. The wave a man gives when he is saying both hello and goodbye at the same time, because he understands that the boy he is waving to is a thread in a tapestry he himself wove without knowing, and that the thread has been pulled taut, and that the tapestry is whole. Then he turned, and he was gone. Marcus Henderson stood for a long moment in the gate area. Then he walked back to his seat. He picked up his pretzel bag. He sat down. He took out his phone, the small old iPhone his mother had given him for the trip, with strict rules about what apps he could and could not use. And he texted his mother. The text said, "Mom, there was an old man at the airport, and I think he might be famous. He said he saved my great-grandpa's life in Vietnam." Tasha Henderson read that text in the break room of Children's Hospital, sitting across from a charge nurse named Donna with a half-eaten yogurt in her hand. She read it 3 times. She read it a 4th time. She put down the yogurt. She typed back,
"Marcus, what are you talking about?"
The reply came back almost immediately. "His name is Walter Greaves. He's flying to San Antonio." "Mom, I think I just met someone really important." Tasha Henderson sat in the break room of Children's Hospital and Googled the name Walter Greaves Plux, Vietnam Plux Earl Henderson. It took her about 90 seconds to find what she was looking for. There was a 2009 article in a small Tennessee newspaper, a reunion event for Vietnam veterans, a photograph of an older white man, Earl Henderson, before he died, and the caption underneath identified the man Earl Henderson had been searching for, unsuccessfully, for 40 years. The man who had carried him out of an ambush at Hill 875. Sergeant Major Walter Greaves, U.S. Army. The article had a photograph of Earl Henderson holding up a framed picture of the 4 men he had served with in 1969. The caption under the framed picture read, "I owe my life to one of these men. I just don't know which." Tasha Henderson, registered nurse at Children's Hospital. Single mother, daughter of a man named Robert Henderson, granddaughter of a man named Earl Henderson. Sat in the break room and started crying. Donna, the charge nurse, said, "Tasha, honey, what is it? What happened?" Tasha could not speak. She just held up her phone. She showed Donna the text. She showed Donna the article. And Donna, who had been Tasha's friend for 8 years and who had heard many times the story of Tasha's grandfather, Earl Henderson, and the man he had spent his life trying to find, Donna read the screen, looked up at her friend and said, "Tasha, honey, your son just found him." Marcus's flight to Atlanta boarded 22 minutes after Walter's. Destiny, the gate agent, walked Marcus down personally too. She had not stopped wiping her eyes for 15 minutes. She told Marcus on the way down the jet bridge, "Honey, what you did today, I'm going to tell my own kids about it tonight. I'm going to tell them for the rest of my life." Marcus said, "Thank you, ma'am." Then he said, "My mama taught me to say thank you." By Wednesday morning, the story was on local news. A traveler at gate C-22, the construction worker, Hector Ramirez, had recorded part of the encuentros his phone. The video was 47 seconds long. It showed Marcus walking up to the security officers. It showed him sitting down next to Walter. It showed him taking Walter's hand. It showed him saying, "We're together." It did not show Walter and Marcus discovering, 20 minutes later, that they were connected by a rice paddy in Vietnam 56 years earlier. That part Hector had not recorded. But the 47 seconds of video that did exist were enough. Hector posted the video to Instagram on Tuesday afternoon with the caption, "I was at Philly Airport this morning. A 9-year-old boy did something I'll never forget. The lady in the blazer called security on an old veteran for crying. This kid stood up. 60 of us stood up after him. The kid taught us all how to be human. By Wednesday morning, the video had 8 million views. By Wednesday afternoon, 23 million. By Friday, NBC Nightly News had run a segment on it. The reporter had tracked down Walter Greaves at his brother's funeral in San Antonio. Walter had been gracious. He had thanked Marcus on national television. He had said, "That boy is the grandson of a man I served with. The Lord arranged that meeting, not me." The reporter had also tracked down Tasha Henderson. Tasha had given a brief statement on her front porch in West Philadelphia. She had said, "I taught my son 3 things. Say please. Say thank you. Don't let anyone be invisible." He listened. That's all this is. He listened. The reporter had also tried to track down Vanessa Carmichael. Vanessa Carmichael did not return calls. She had, in fact, taken the rest of the week off from her job. She had not gone to Miami. She had canceled the long weekend at her friend's beach house. Her husband had flown home from Miami on Sunday and found her sitting at the kitchen table with no makeup on, in the same clothes she had been wearing for 2 days, reading and rereading the same news articles. He had said, "Vanessa, what is going on?" She had said very quietly, "I'm the woman in the blazer." He had not understood what she meant. She had pushed her phone toward him. He had read the article. He had looked at her. He had said, "Vanessa, you're the one who, yes. You're the woman who, yes." He had sat down across from her. He had not said anything for a long time. Eventually, he had said, "Vanessa, what are you going to do?" She had said, "I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something." She did eventually write a letter to Walter Greaves, care of his foster son Jamal, whose address she found through a network of researchers she paid handsomely. The letter was 3 pages long. It did not ask for forgiveness. It did not minimize what she had done. It said, in part, "I called security on a man who was crying because his brother had died. I told an airport that I felt unsafe. The truth is that I felt uncomfortable, and I have spent 46 years confusing the two. I am writing this to you not because I deserve a response, but because I have learned that some apologies have to be written down so that the writer cannot pretend, later, that she did not mean them." Walter Greaves received the letter 3 weeks after the funeral. He read it twice. He sat with it for a day. Then he wrote her back. His letter was 1 sentence long. "Mrs. Carmichael, I forgive you. Now go and live differently. W. Greaves." The story did not end at the airport. Marcus came home from Atlanta on Sunday night. Tasha picked him up at the curb. She hugged him for a long time. She said, "Baby, do you know what you did?" Marcus said, "I don't know, Mom. I just stood up." Tasha said, "I know, baby, I know. That's exactly what you did." 2 months later, on a Saturday in May, Walter Greaves drove from West Philadelphia to a small house on a quiet street in Mount Airy. He had taken the bus, then a Lyft. He was wearing a clean white shirt and dark slacks. He was carrying a folder under his arm. Tasha Henderson opened the door. She had not stopped crying for the last hour. Walter Greaves said, "Ma'am, are you Earl Henderson's granddaughter?" Tasha could not speak. She nodded. Walter said, "Ma'am, I knew your grandfather for about 40 minutes. I've thought about him for 56 years. I came here to tell you who he was on the day I knew him. May I come in?" Tasha stepped aside. Marcus appeared in the hallway behind her. He saw Walter. His face broke into a smile that lit up the entire row house. Walter Greaves spent 4 hours at Tasha Henderson's kitchen table that Saturday. He told her about her grandfather, the young soldier from Tennessee, 21 years old, scared, brave, with a Tennessee accent so thick that Walter had needed to repeat the medic's instructions twice. The way Earl had cursed and apologized for cursing in the same breath. The way Earl, before they reached the medevac, had looked up at Walter from the rice paddy mud and said, "I swear it." Earl Henderson had named his first son Walter. Robert Henderson, Tasha's father, Marcus's grandfather, had a middle name. The middle name was Walter. Marcus Walter Henderson was sitting at the kitchen table. Marcus said, "I have his name." Walter Greaves looked at him. The 81-year-old veteran, the 9-year-old boy, the kitchen table in West Philadelphia, the Saturday afternoon light coming through the window. He said, "Yes, son, you do." If Vanessa Carmichael had simply asked Walter Greaves why he was crying, if she had walked across that gate area, not to call security but to offer a tissue, a question, a moment of recognition, none of this would have happened the way it did. There would have been no viral video. There would have been no national news. There would have been no kitchen table in Mount Airy, with 3 generations of one family closing a 56-year loop. But she didn't. For 399 adults in Gate C22, kindness was not their first instinct. Discomfort was. Avoidance was. The instinct to look down at a phone, to put on headphones, to pretend that an old man's grief was someone else's problem. And Marcus, who was 9, who had been raised by a single mother, who taught him 3 things: say please, say thank you, never let anyone be invisible. Marcus did the simplest thing in the world. He stood up. He took an old man's hand. He said, "We're together." And the room changed. 63 adults stood up because a child had moved. The cream-colored blazer was undone by a 9-year-old's quiet sentence about a man's brother. A circle that began in a rice paddy in Vietnam in 1969 closed in a Philadelphia airport in 2026. A grandfather and a great-grandson and a Saturday afternoon at a kitchen table. The road, as Walter Greaves's old friend Ebube Okonkwo might have said, only remembers the ones who stop. But it also remembers the ones who stand up. Especially the ones who are 9. Especially the ones who haven't yet been taught. By airports, by traffic, by the long erosion of years, that some moments are too inconvenient to acknowledge. If you want to see who fate visits next, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because in stories like these, the ones who walk away from a crying old man always lose more than they think. And the ones who stand up, even the small ones, especially the small ones, they always end up at the kitchen table. Some people look away. Some people stand up. Be the one who stands up. The world is watching, and so are the children.